I was just curious. Anybody here like using KMP? Is everybody here because you're like, I want to know how to convince my iOS devs that this isn't terrible? All right. Well, you're sort of in the advanced class, but I'll explain. All right. I'm Kevin, technology partner at TouchLab. Okay. I was like, I thought someone was giving me instructions. We have a lot of this content, like and like a ton of it. And this guide, go check it out. You don't have to get the URL; just go to touchlab.co blog. Like you'll find all this stuff. Take the URL if you want. It's currently a 7-parter. It's probably going to be about a 9 to 10-parter. I wrote like a mini book, but I don't have the mental capacity to like form a narrative into a book. Much less by the time I'm done and it'll be whatever. Just FYI. And also, I did one run through of this. Writing the keynote kind of sucks all the air out of the room. And the first one was an hour. So I didn't cut slides, but a lot of my asides, because I'm known for wanting that I will speak a little fast. So let's go. I've been talking about this a lot. I mean, before last year, but really this talk series about how teams use KMP. That was season 1, was sort of Kotlin Conf 2023. Season 2 is like right now, but it's been like the content, something at Kotlin Conf, this live stream, and now this talk, and it'll be ongoing, right? And by the way, like the stuff that I don't have in this talk is all in that talk. It's just that it was way too much. Why? Because it's a big topic. And it's not entirely clear because a lot of this is not mechanical tech. It is people stuff. And people stuff's like the hard stuff, right? So again, this talk drops a lot. Why? Because it's focused. And I'm hoping people here have really been trying this or thinking it, and the things that they're running into, again, the community is here if you went to the keynote. This is a time to talk, and I want to get these ideas out, and I want feedback. Tell me I'm wrong or why I'm wrong. That's great. So we can learn, right? So what are my credentials? And almost a decade. And you're like, wait, there wasn't KMP a decade ago. Yeah, but I was doing this J2OBJC thing before that. And you're like, that's totally different. It's not. It's philosophically similar to what this is, right? We had Room working on iOS in 2017. The day after it was launched, anyone's like, J2OBJ sucks. I'm like, well, it was stable and it worked really well, just to let you know. All in on KMP in 2018, me and TouchLab, which is probably not a great idea. One second. Let me make sure this isn't the talk where I had the backup. Like I had 2 keynotes. 2 versions of this where I was just copying stuff. It's not the backup. Okay, sorry for the thing. Anyway, all right. Okay, so we did SQLite. I mean, what are we doing in KMP? SQLite, Kotlin native. We had the first multi-platform app in the App Store. I think it was droidcon NYC. Not the first Kotlin native, but multi-platform. We had definitely the first iOS app with Compose in the App Store. Again, droidcon NYC. We had I added generics to the Objective-C output to Kotlin native. The Xcode debugger, there was some original stuff. Thaddeus did some magic not some months ago. Check it out. It's super fast. And this thing, Sky, which also is largely Thaddeus and Philip on our team, it makes your Swift APIs much better coming out of this. SPM publishing tool, if you're publishing SPM, spoilers, you may not want to use that depending on what you're doing. Out of the gate, we had some, we didn't start on easy mode. It was like, this was our first people we were working with, helping with publishing, and they were also essentially our patrons to help with open source for iOS developer experience 2019, early 2019. Anyway, summaries, I've thought about this a lot, and still thinking about it. So context of today, KMP is stable, JetBrains, right? Google endorsing KMP for sharing business logic. You and your team might be saying, let's give this a try, and a bunch of teams are also. So the good news is adding some KMP is easy, relatively. Most teams succeed. The bad news is scaling KMP is hard. Most teams fail. Why? When you see this color slide, that means this is a point I'm trying to, a turning point or something, remember this, right? We're not going to focus on the how so much because That's all in the blogs and videos and other talks or whatever. But we need to understand why. Why are these things difficult, right? I'm giving my thoughts, and these are opinions and observations. And the only thing I have over most people is I've just been doing this for almost a decade. I don't know everything, so I want to trigger conversations at a conference. Let's confer. So again, Android community is here. If you went to the keynote, it's a great time to talk about stuff. Team guidance, not much. There's really no useful guidance out there, right? The majority of it is respectfully imagined. Like, this is what I think you should do. I write a blog post, people do it. Not from experience. Is that unique to KMP? No, that's all new tech stuff starts with that, right? You start with, let's try this, and then you get feedback. Well, we're in the feedback loop phase and trying to figure it out. Why? Again, KMP is new. These things take time. Like, you don't just a miracle imagine together advice. You have to try things. You go give conference talks and people disagree and you try other stuff. Another thing, I won't go into it a lot here, shared code with KMP is unique, and everything is unique, but like KMP, as far as how it shares code, is unique in the shared code world. And KMP, because it does a wide spectrum of possible targets and configurations, KMP and teams, these terms mean a lot of things. So it's difficult to nail down general advice. So again, it is critical to understand the important problems, because I feel like to a large degree there's a lot of what I would call problem bike shedding, which is we pick the concrete problems that people talk about and we can solve them, and we're not really understanding existential blockers, right? So we got to figure that out. The big issues, my opinion, that few discuss, it is like how you develop with KMP. There's a major workflow mismatch. Team structure. Of course, people talk about this a bit, but like there is a lot of nuance that is involved in this. Team planning. Like if your plan is like, hey, show the iOS people some Kotlin and how similar Kotlin is to Swift. That is not team planning. I'm talking about a much deeper thing. And then also KMP. People that do KMP, guess what? Surprise, they're mostly Android people. That is not just at your team. That is industry-wide. From the biggest companies building the libraries to the people building the platforms to the people making libraries, the iOS professional experience developer who learns KMP and understands it is extremely rare. And we need more. Other issues that everybody else discusses, right? These are problems. They're definitely problems. But they are like sort of tech problems and tech people. Like it's like I get my head around this, we can solve it. So then it becomes a problem that they focus on, right? Tooling needs to improve, of course. Objective-C, geez, once we get Swift export. And Gradle setup is complicated. If you work in a production Android app, is your Gradle setup complicated? Of course it is. Single framework. It's a problem, but there's things to work around, right? And these things are worked on, continuously, right? One of the big dangers that I see a lot is once we have blank, right? There's this cycle of hope and goes back from early KMP. It's like, geez, this is a problem. Once we get this, the iOS people will finally get it. And I got some news for you. Like, that is not how that works. But the continued cycle keeps us not really figuring it out, right? And again, I've been doing this at J2LBJC. I mean, nobody cared about that, even though it worked. But again, from the beginning of KMP, it's like, once we get rid of that strict memory model, we're off to the races. Well, it's gone. You want Swift export? We got Sky. Sky's important. Some of you heard about it, you haven't. A lot of the problem is Android engineers don't really understand Swift. They don't even know why Sky is valuable. But here's the thing. The tech works for apps, not so much for teams at scale. And I would say the bullshit issue, and I do hear this fairly often. iOS devs are closed-minded, and I've got some bad news for you. A lot of them think the same thing about you. That is how people work, groups of people. Some people, it's a spectrum. They're open-minded, they're closed-minded. They think these things of other people, they don't. Listen to iOS team complaints, and some of them are not great, but some of them are very important. So nuanced approaches. And as tech ecosystems start with core tech, this is the phase they all go through, right? You have to evolve to how to do this at scale in production. KMP is not different. But we need to focus and give advice that's specific, because general advice does not work. Nuanced, what does that mean? This talk is focused on a very specific lane. Team is a few mobile devs. What's the minimum? I don't know, a few, right? Specialists, Android and iOS devs. If you got a bunch of web devs trying to figure out mobile with KMP, you got a whole different problem. It's not about this. Native UI. Compose is great. That's not what we're talking about here. Mostly existing apps and teams, a little bit of, whatever, new stuff. Mostly multiple repo. That's what we're talking about. More nuance is still coming as I've been diving into this and even this talk. And then conversations in the last week, which I've had to change half the slides. It's very different. Like, there's this medium-ish 510, a medium plus 1020, and then you talk to people with hundreds across different feature teams and parts of the org. And they're all kind of different, share a lot of similar things, but not entirely. So what about Compose? The keynote was fun. I agree. But completely different approaches. If you look at these slides, you're like, that's a good idea. Let's do that with a Compose app. It's a waste of time. Just don't. So the basic situation, right? KMP works. It's a perfect no. Can you build a large app? Absolutely. Imagine what I would call a maximal KMP app where you've got native UIs, but under the hood, you're really sharing a lot of code. It's doing really great. The value would be obvious. The problem is the bigger the team, the fewer examples of that. And that is a problem, right? J2OBJ was pretty similar. It was maddening. I'm like, this works. I'm screaming into the void. It definitely worked, but nobody wanted to hear that story. It wasn't cool. There's a lot of other things going on, but still. This can work, but why aren't teams using it at scale? Anyway, that's this talk and after this talk. So one of the things we need are test subjects. If you've been thinking about this, but you're like, I don't know what to do, and I'm hoping that Kevin's just going to tell me what to do, we have some approaches. But here's the thing. You cannot build something in a room and then test it at scale. Like you just can't have a bunch of developers pretending to make an app for 2 years. I mean, you could, but you're not going to, right? Like this, you can't test big ideas in a lab. And it's a pervasive problem with anything we're doing. Like you have to test them in a real environment. Somebody's got to do it. Hopefully somebody wants to try. Let me know. Reach out, please. So let's not get overwhelmed with today problems. Assume like mechanical problems can be solved or mitigated. Is that today, 6 months, a year, whatever, right? Assume iOS devs won't reflexively be against this, right? Especially assume that this can work, right? There's a bit of fatalism from people who have tried it and struggled. Assume that there's a way forward, right? So let's start. There are two approaches to KMP classically, right? For new, existing apps, small teams, large teams, whatever. Two basic approaches, right? The default, I call this the default approach, the mono repo, just everything in one place. KMP, Android, iOS. That is what pretty much every sample app looks like. Generally speaking, I think that's what JetBrains and everybody else envisions as a KMP app setup, right? That's the default. The other one is library. What's that weird term? Go look at the docs. I got smart sounding terms because I like to sound smart. There's a reason for it though. Anyway, library. KMP repo is external. You have versioned libraries that publish to Android and iOS apps. Simple, right? This is a weird sort of corollary where you have Kotlin and Android and they publish to iOS. This does happen. Android's direct, iOS gets libraries. I originally assumed that this would be very common. It's not. Why? There's some reasons. I won't get into it. I don't know all of them. Just assume that most teams say, let's add a new repo and pull stuff in. Now, it also shares a lot of the same characteristics and problems. So all team guidance is library, right? And all, right? So libraries are familiar. They don't impact your workflow if you're not working on the KMP. Adding an Xcode dependency is easy. It's also not reasonable to push back on that. That's a whole different discussion. Getting started, see piloting and iterating in the docs. That's that phase. When getting and starting and learning, you're not moving fast. You're not trying to prove that KMP is going to be efficient. If you are, that is just not the point. You should be doing it. Add a library is what you should do. You're going to learn about KMP, packaging, libraries, Swift-facing APIs. Spoiler alert, if you're an Android dev and you just write whatever Kotlin and export it, it's not good in a lot of the cases, right? See Sky. But, SKIA, I don't mean see this guy. So then like production stuff later, crash reporting, binary size control, these are all going to matter in real apps. So you can learn this in the learning phase with a library if you want. Why is the library always the advice? Well, imagine the first step was, hey, merge your production repos. And then we're going to try KMP, right? If you're like a small team, like, maybe, but like if you're a normal production team with some double-digit developers, good luck. In fact, when you're starting, your KMP is like this. It would be smaller than that, but you wouldn't be able to see it on the slide. You know what I mean? So rather dramatic just to try out some new tech that not everybody's sold on, right? Again, KMP is easier with small teams that figure it out. Are there teams with 3 devs building apps are like, yeah, screw it, let's merge repos? I'm sure they exist. But again, small teams. So, already in a mono repo, quickly, I would still say, sure, add a module, but still treat it like a library. Because there are things that libraries make easier, or at least make sure your devs are not just changing KMP on the fly when they're making app changes. I'll talk about it later. Library is a model, but maybe not in practice, right? A library and model, not in practice. I won't read the whole slide. There's a blog post. But the thing is, there's no source jar for Xcode binary frameworks, which is what a Kotlin framework is. So it depends on your team vision, but maybe you want to do it with source because you want to expose your iOS developers to the source. So what do I mean by team vision? And this is one of those things that's important to have early on. Not like let's see how it goes. A year from now, if you've succeeded, what does everything look like? And try to plan ahead. So is it just libraries, right? Not featured dev. A few shared modules. Maybe you have something that you want to replace. A lot of teams have been doing this, larger teams. You just want to get rid of something. Maybe you have a lot of logic. Google Workspace is kind of that, where a ton of work is a library. Well, then do that. Just that. Good news, you're done for this talk, right? Head up the content, check it out, ping me on Slack. Libraries are easy. I don't mean writing the library. I mean incorporating KMP into an app mechanically. This is a model everyone's used to. There are tools to help you to do this. You can set this up. They're easy from the people perspective. So also ignore the published source concept because that's not for you. You don't need it. This talk is about the other visions. What might they be? So mechanical, right? Where is your KMP, right? Obviously, your native is going to be UI. That is an easy decision. And if you're writing libraries, hey, KMP, that's great. But what about this? This is where you have to make some decisions, right? I will avoid the term view model because what do I mean? Capital V? Do I mean the concept? It's complicated. I'm going to just say architecture to mean you're getting very up in the business of day-to-day dev. That's it. So the question is, is KMP in your feature code? Are you directly supporting day-to-day app dev, or are you doing libraries? That is that vision. Now, people is the difficult stuff, okay? Forget repo layout, forget training, forget how, for now. Who does what? Who do you envision doing what in this scenario, right? Obviously, Android and iOS devs are going to do Android and iOS specific work. I don't think that's hard to figure out. Almost certainly the Android people will be doing some KMP work. Is this what you want to do? Are the iOS devs fully contributing to the KMP? That is something you have to decide up front. Maybe it'll be more nuanced. They're not doing a lot of heavy lifting architecture, but they are implementing the iOS parts of the KMP. They are making those horrible Swift interfaces less horrible. Maybe they are beginning to learn stuff, right? That is that thing. And I think maybe this is the most practical solution that many teams will adopt. Who knows, right? But it's not static, right? You can have a process where you begin with hey, you got to be able to deal with the KMP. And for some of the engineers, hey, you're going to learn coroutines and Kotlin and stuff. People will learn that over time, but that takes time. Process is something that we talk about again in the docs. There's no time. Who has time for everything? The big sort of like question, and a lot of people like this, is this what you want to do? Now you have mobile devs. Everybody does everything. And there are probably people in this room that are like, that's crazy. No way. But some of you, I guarantee, are thinking, well, yeah, that's the dream, right? I'll get back to it. So library dev versus feature dev, right? When we see, again, this color slide, I mean the topic is important. Library dev, logically, physically separate modules, right? Independently developed. It can be the same developers, but it's independently developed. It can be a different devs, it can be different org. Generally slow pace of change, at least to the consuming side. And incrementally versioned releases. What is that? It's a library. We're very familiar with that, right? It looks like this. So perhaps you have a different repo. There's your thing, library dev. Now, feature dev, app UI and architecture, right? Directly developed app features. That's why it's called feature dev. Edited as a unit. Generally, I'll get to that in a second. Rapid, concurrent, conflicting changes. That's why we use Git, okay? And it's just day-to-day app feature. It's a feature because you're adding a feature, right? That's this portion of the chart. Very busy stuff going on in there. So libraries, example, server calls. Like the schedule of server call changes is not yours, it's the server, right? So these don't change on the app schedule. Tax calculation. If you're changing the onboarding flow, it's probably not going to change the outcome of your tax calculation. Local DB, this is like, hey, this is driven by features. Yeah, but database changes involve migration so much slower. And they are also explicitly linearly versioned. So they kind of align fairly well with the library, right? Features, app stuff, right? And it's not just features, like yes, new features, but bug fixes, refactors, whatever you're doing, day-to-day stuff, right? Briefly, I said generally speaking, because I assume this is how I work, this is how teams I've seen work, like you're like, yeah, you might set up the, view model and all that stuff as much as you think is appropriate, and then you're doing the screen. But when you're changing that code, because you don't know everything up front, like it's developed as a unit. If you are not doing that, and one of the things I don't know is how some teams are different. Some teams, especially at very, very large companies, kind of do think about things differently. So if you're not doing it this way, if you're quite literally doing this, and I don't mean like kinda, I mean like you do that and you're done with the architecture and then you do the UI. Then please talk to me. And it's weird, I've talked to some people who are trying to make KMP work and like, well, that's what I do. I'm like, all right. And especially like trying to do this, like one of the strategies is write the test the shit out of it, and then write the screens. And it's like, okay, if you're doing that, I would like to know, because again, it blows up some of the mental model. So if you're looking at that and thinking, oh, maybe we should do that, because that means we'll write tests better, right? Like KMP's golden rule. If you wouldn't do it without KMP, maybe you shouldn't with KMP, unless you have a very good reason. It's a good rule to apply to some plan you think will be good. Like KMP will force us to blank. It's not a great reason. And I would say, there's nothing stopping you from trying it now. Try it now. See what your team thinks. You could have been doing it the whole time. Why do you think KMP is going to force you? So, library dev versus feature dev, a simple concept, critical distinction for scaling. So we'll get into what that means. Library dev is easy, right? It is. I mean, not the library itself, but the development flow is easy. We're used to it, whatever. The problem is, if you're doing KMP with library dev and a few modules, this is the outcome, right? Yes, you have KMP, you have touched the base, you can check off a box, but it's not doing much. Are you getting value out of this? You know what I mean? Like, not really. And you might even be adding a couple megs of binary size to your iOS app for 4 server calls. So it depends on the situation, but that is the problem. Like specific apps, like you might have a very critical piece of code that has to be written precisely and you want to write it once, right? So tax calculation, sure. Machine learning, right? I mean, you write it once, it's not that much code, but my God, that's very important, it's valuable. Of course, if you're doing machine learning, you're probably doing this. Like why are you doing KMP? I mean, no offense, JetBrains and everyone else, but you're going to be doing Python, right? So, Python. Yeah, anyway. And Google Workspace is a very particular case. Like they have mountains of code that has been the Java, J2SE web thing, like they do it for years. They are moving that to KMP at mega scale. Of course, that's very different. Their chart might look like this, right? But generally speaking, if you're adding a few modules for KMP, that's great way to get started. But this is the outcome if that's where you stop. Scaling means more shared, less platform native. In summary, that's all that means. How do you do more KMP? Meaningful amounts, right? The simple answer is go where the action is, right? If you're just doing a library or whatever and you're not where people are doing their day-to-day stuff, you're not where the action is, right? The action for most native mobile devs, generally speaking, is feature work. So, again, extrapolate it to your situation, like maybe, there's this feature and then you go out here and you got a whole bunch of feature teams doing different things and the features are pulled in like libraries. I'm like, yeah, but zoom the lens in on the parts. Those are feature development areas. That's where feature dev happens, right? And also, I wasn't going to talk about Compose, but I think going forward, you might start to see things like this. They could happen. I don't know. I talked to someone yesterday. It was wild. They added, I had no idea. They added a Compose view into this production app. So, so my antagonist from the keynote. So in other words, mobile dev, right? Thanks for explaining how everything works. Sure, but I wanted to clearly define some terms that people sort of assume because it's going to matter when we get to these other discussions, right? The first thing that's going to matter, feature dev does not work with a library model. I mean, it works, but it doesn't scale. Let me explain. So, forget KMP for a moment. Just think Android or iOS or whatever, right? Again, with the general assumptions that this is developed as a unit, feature dev up top. It's in the same repo. The two parts, again, unit. There are many concurrent conflicting changes. That's why we use Git, right? It's obvious. So, there was multiple. Okay, Git is the bouncer, right? Or the DJ or whatever. Git's controlling the party. That's what you're doing. So when we get back to here, library dev, you likely have less conflicting concurrent changes, right? At least in the context of KMP. And critically, you'll have linear versions, right? Like that's a critical thing that we're going to talk about, right? If you want to see what feature dev with a library model looks like, it's a lot. I copied it from my notes. I'm not going to read all that to you. I tried to summarize it a little bit, but essentially, you change the KMP code, test it locally with the app. You push your KMP PR. It has to get approved, and all that might take a day or two. Then you wait for the build, which is going to take some time. Then you update your app, because you don't know if other people committed stuff to KMP while the library was out there. So you need the latest from main. Then you do your app changes, you do your PR, you push, you wait for the stuff, and then you worry about the other app. It's not a great process. Yes, I know. Software devs have a lot of process involved. But the attempt here is to move from this to this, right? And the problem is linear versions. So again, small teams have no problem. Like you have one or two devs, like you get on Slack. It's like, hey, hold off, just started. Okay, but pull my branch. He moved everything. Was random a good name for a branch, or a package? Fair. All right. KMP is easier for small teams. If you've got 20 devs, that's not going to work. It just simply isn't. It's obvious, right? I call this the horizontal limit. It limits how much you can actually achieve, or how many people can be doing this at the same time. So KMP's potential value is gone. It is eaten by your workflow bottleneck. Some teams that we talk to see this coming, yet they still try it. Smaller teams, 4 or 5 devs. Oh my God, super painful. So what we're looking for here is this, right? We want to get to this, but what we get is this. Small teams do a lot, big teams do a little. And I would argue in the library model, it's to large part, because of that bottleneck, right? This horizontal limit. So, big apps are still using it, but I think this is a big KMP problem for KMP, right? Few big wins. Again, little apps do a lot, big apps do a little, right? And it's a thing where it's just the truth. When people go to conferences or read blog posts, they assign more value to people from big teams and names. So if the big teams and names are like, we tried it, it doesn't do much, or we got a little bit of blah, 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 guess what? That's what KMP was. It didn't work out. And sharing code is KMP's killer app. If that does not work out, that's not good. So, is that the only problem? No, but it seems like a good one to work on, right? So, when are linear versions good? Positive. Can you take a wild guess? Again, when you're learning, when you're not moving fast, right? Have a couple of devs experimenting with KMP. Figure out your architecture. Are you going to want to use Jetpack View Model for your iOS team? Talk to them. I don't know that that's what they want, right? You have to figure out the border. You learn all these things. It just doesn't scale, right? Another thing that is mentally I want to bring up, like I talk to people through this, people who are knowledgeable and aware, and hey, KMP is your app code. It's not a separate thing, even on iOS, if you're trying to do this. And Android devs get this. It's like, it's all Kotlin. Like, sure, it's my app code. But for iOS devs, it's like, well, I do Swift, and then there's this other thing. It's all still library thought. It is not. It's part of your app code if you're doing day-to-day feature dev, and you have to get over that. I just had to explain this to somebody, Android dev. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I totally get it, but my iOS team uses SPM. I'm like, I understand. That's not what I'm saying. You got to figure it out. So anyway, default. We're back to the default thing, mono repo, right? This is supposed to be how you do it in the best case. Let's assume your team is cool with doing the whole grand merge, which again, huge. I don't know, and I mean this. I've been doing this for a while. I cannot name off the top of my head a sort of medium to large team with an existing app that decided to merge their production repos for KMP. See the golden rule. I'm sure someone's done it, but they never gave me the heads up. This problem is gone. That's good, right? But then you have this problem. Changes impact both platforms, coupled development, right? And immediately. And if you do nothing to mitigate that, if you make an Android change that touches KMP, it'll impact iOS. It could be positive. It could be negative. It could do nothing. It might crash. You have no idea, right? So obviously, that's not how that's going to work. And season 1 of this talk ended with this sort of like, I don't know moment. Here are mitigations. And I had interviewed a bunch of folks who were doing KMP at larger companies to ask them what they do to solve this. And I would describe those calls as mutual disappointment. They got on the call and said, gee, I was hoping you'd tell me. And every one of them was like, we just do library, right? We just deal with it, right? Updated for season 2, these things like somebody's seriously talking about like pair coding with an iOS and Android dev for like everything. I mean, some people love pair coding, and it's not me, and especially like in that situation. I don't know, maybe. Strict, and I mean strict and bold, architecture, tests, UI, and rely on your tests to prevent anything from causing these problems. Or mobile devs just have to become generalists, see the complex arrow diagram. So, changes impact both platforms. Coupled development. Will it work? Yeah. But you got to do things to make it work. This is part of what's unique about KMP and shared code, right? You would never, unless you're Dropbox, try to do this with like C++, right? Nobody does. So it'll impact your workflow a lot, and that reduces KMP's potential value, assuming you're not risking your app's integrity itself. Also, maybe things to consider: morale, retention. If you are sure that no one's going to quit, I got some bad news for you. And the other thing that's obvious, and it's going to happen, devs are like, I'm just going to write this in native and hopefully no one notices. And then managers have to play, that should be in the other place. Not a great place to be, right? Now, I hear this a lot too, right? Maybe this is good though. Maybe we should pair code. Feature drift and silos is a problem. For sure it is. Taps the sign, the golden rule. You can start doing that now. See what your team thinks about being on Zoom all day with platform developers talking about shit. Maybe it'll go well. I don't know. So back to everyone does everything. And, some KMP fans like really want this, like emotionally want this, right? Merging teams, breaking the silos. I got some quick thoughts because I had to cut. This would be a 3-hour talk if I didn't cut. This is not a new idea. I've been in mobile since before. I've been in Android since before there were phones. Since the beginning, this has been something that people have been calling for 15 years, okay? And yet it's uncommon. Why is you can explain it any way you want, but that should at least give you pause for the potential this may not work out the way you want it to work out, right? And then I would also throw out specialists exist for a reason. In general, not just mobile devs. We wouldn't have cardiologists if we didn't kind of need cardiologists. You know what I mean? That may be the answer. I sat in this business leader thing yesterday, and universally everyone's like, well, they just don't want to learn stuff. They just want to, they're a platform. They still talk that way at that level. And I'm like, I don't think you're entirely accurate. I also was like, I don't give a shit. I'm not going to argue with you, right? But it's not entirely true. There is some platform identity, but it's maybe the specialty hits a cognitive limit where in a complex app, you just really can't generally maintain competence at the level necessary to do both platforms competently at the same time. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not here to tell you why. I'm here to tell you what I observe. So, also, you can do this without KMP. Suggest it. See how it goes. Few do. For 15 years, again. So, right. I'm getting ahead of my slides. So, go see my blog post at Not Published Yet. It's coming soon, I swear. It's just that it's this huge, long post. This is the potential header image for that post. I've written it multiple times. And I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying reduce the risk and take it in stages. Don't assume it'll be smooth. And definitely don't think KMP is going to make it magically happen. So, yes, I know. The keynote was more fun. This is very bleak for everyone that was making plans, okay? And here's where we are, uncharted territory to some degree, right? Some teams will have to try things in their environment. I'm hoping you want to. Please ping me 24 hours a day on Slack. I won't answer till the morning, but ping me. Let's talk. I want to know who's trying this, right? Another thing I'm going to say, JetBrains people, earmuffs. KMP was not designed around native mobile teams, at least not how they actually work. And it's important to understand that. That is not a dig on JetBrains, just a fact. KMP's technical design makes sense given what it's doing. It's elegant. However, the presumption that the default model repo, everything there, and you just do it that way, the default is that's how you should do it. That's how you should write KMP, and it's deeply embedded. Season 1, I didn't even question that. I was just trying to mitigate it, right? When KMP was designed, it did not go through, it wasn't in a lab, it was in a lab. They didn't take something that barely worked, gave it to a team of 100 mobile engineers and said, hey, put this in your production app and let us know how it goes. That did not happen. Well, that's what has to happen now. That's the phase we're at, and you got to figure that out. And again, current advice, library or just merge all your shit it's not going to work, right? So in general, it's like bend the process, bend the team, or both. And obviously some of this needs to happen to some degree, but the severity of how much bending needs to happen is what I'm really focused on. So a couple quick stories. And of course, I'm getting ready for a conference, and I got all my slides. I'm like, I'm so smart. I'm putting all these other things in there. And then somebody reaches out a week before and drops a bomb on my thinking. And then I got through it, not really. But anyway, swiftly. We know it for a while, early on. Anyway, some notes about their, because he said we're doing KMP, the full team, very successful. So I'm like, tell me more. So Greenfield, right? And then some of these quotes. Yeah, you got to start with the mono repo. Again, 15, 20 plus devs, they kind of cycle up and down depending on what they're doing. Hired for this. It's an important distinction, right? Everybody is expected to learn KMP, and most devs do both platforms. It's essentially what he said. I asked him about his process of, architecture and whatever. And this one, I have to dig into. We didn't have time to have a call. I'm going to schedule a call. UI, then VM, then wire the UI. Okay. I got to dig into how the hell that works, but it was in the inverse of what I thought. And then this one, heavy-handed guardrails. I'm like, I'm curious also, what the hell does heavy-handed guardrails about this? But I'm trying to imagine, again, existing team, you just go into it like, hey, we're going to do this. Large team, existing app. That's a tough one, right? And then another one, I didn't have time to reach out and get permission or the update I talked to him a few months ago. But they're very successful too. And again, Greenfield started with Monty Repo, 20-ish devs. Again, hired for this, half and half. Here's our conversation. And they reached out for some help. Everyone does everything, but iOS devs are struggling with these, all the Kotlin stuff. And my immediate response was like, wow, the Kotlin devs are fine with Swift. And he's like, well, they're busy with Android KMP. And the Swift PRs were taking up so much time from the Swift devs because Kotlin engineers can learn Swift syntax and basic stuff, but thinking in Swift is a very different thing, and it's taking a long time to do it. So like, they're busy with the Kotlin stuff, so the Swift engineers just do all the Swift. Everybody does everything. Now, they're doing well, both of them. And honestly, long-term members do eventually get a handle on being productive on both these things, right? The orgs, the managers, reportedly the teams are happy with the KMP. I didn't get private interviews with the teams. These are not bad stories, but they're examples of where scaled seems to work, but there are a whole lot of bending. Also, both Greenfield, app, and team. It's important to understand that, right? I had another story yesterday. We actually worked on this thing, and they had some wild thing I don't even talk about. But it was all KMP, everything, but with native views. And then actually last night I was like, we added some CMP screens. Team loves it. So I'm like, I don't even know how to process that. I'm gonna have that conversation later. But anyway, this is possibly the answer. Like extreme, not the CMP, the stuff before. Extreme changes, bending, extreme bending. This might be the answer to actually make KMP for sure code and native UIs actually work out in the wild. I don't love that answer, but you can't just ignore reality. And maybe big existing teams just won't scale KMP. Maybe I need a different definition of scale, right? Again, I don't like thinking through that idea. The tech can work technically, but like why? Why is this so hard? It's Moby Dick, by the way. So the white whale is what I'm doing, chasing, whatever. So, but I'll finish my thoughts, okay? And again, the reason I changed this talk to focus on what's a problem is because I rushed to the problem and gave you all my wonderful new thoughts, and people are like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, we have to understand the problems. So I have this different plan that's proving. Don't get caught up on the how just yet, But again, I've been staring at this for like a decade. And again, the tech works. How do you get it to work with teams? The first thing I would say is don't couple your teams, the workflow, the repos. Don't couple any of it. As much as I think that's something that I was like, if we can do it without doing that, that's going to help quite a bit. I'm not saying don't talk more. You're going to have to talk more. I'm not saying don't pair code on some architecture shit. Of course, you're going to be closer, but don't force the teams to have to work in lockstep all the time. And let specialists be specialists. This is an argument that I think is important to make. If you want to merge your teams, you give it your best. But but learn enough KMP. How much the iOS people are going to learn? I don't know. There's a debate you're going to have. Perhaps platform preferentialists. Please give a new term because that's a lot to say. KMP, find the team, process thoughts, look at the doc. Right, and remember, this is obviously a much bigger lift for iOS. Keep that in mind, right? At the same time, KMP, it's not, maybe you have trouble scaling, but a lot of stuff's coming. There's a lot of people doing KMP, and a KMP dev with iOS experience is extremely rare. They're going to be in demand. There is an argument for an iOS dev to really want to get excited about this. Tell a good story. Create a path for the team. And I mean the whole team, not just, hey, folks, you have to do less work. That doesn't work. Look at the docs, right? So I'm calling this a branching strategy because when I use, but it's a branching strategy and CI work in the middle, right? But in summary, here's what it does. There is a KMP repo, but the KMP actually lives in both apps. It is just tracked in some way. Not submodules, unless you want, but you don't have to do that. And the KMP repo just coordinates the changes between these two things, right? But devs make changes to app code with their usual procedures directly in the app repo, right? Not worrying about breaking the other platform and actually even implementing it. If you're on Android, turn off the iOS source sets. If you're on iOS, turn off the Android source sets. Just edit your app. and worry about that, right? It's also app code. On iOS, the KMP is also app code. Remember that principle. So some people make some edits, right? And they don't care what happens. But it turns out something in KMP was changed. That CI takes that over to the KMP repo and stores it in some magical way to do bookkeeping. The KMP repo is doing that, but you never edit that directly, right? And you just make changes, go through your normal process, merge the thing into the thing, let CI take a rest. And then, somebody makes a change and it didn't do anything at KMP. Whatever, nothing changes. Android does the same thing, right? A couple changes come in there that impact the KMP, right? And then, I think this is next. Oh, yeah, some other changes, and it didn't impact the KMP. You as the engineer do not care, right? I mean, maybe you care, but just don't worry about it, right? And at some point, explicitly, this is the only special thing. You see what's missing through Git and maybe through project management. We need these features. So an iOS dev creates a branch, pulls these in, implements them, does the screen, tests the stuff. That's their responsibility. And then it goes back into the normal flow of PR merge. You're just worried about that app, right? And then same thing. You keep going on about your lives. On the other side, the Android does the same thing and pulls these things in. What does this allow you to do? Decouple your teams. Not worry about breaking an app. You don't have to learn all this crazy stuff up front. Critically, you don't have to merge your repos, right? I'll be done with. We have a functional model, see the blog. It will not be enough to scale to a large team today. We need feedback. If I added every feature that we can think of, I'd still be working on it 2 years from now. We have a very guardrail feature version. However, you won't blow up your workflow trying it. It's a separate repo. If you need to do the CI stuff locally, just do it locally. Do it all in a test branch. I would love to hear feedback. If you plan to try this, though, please ping me. It is a new research tool. Now, if you're thinking like, hey, we can get rid of that linear problem, but let's just have builds that are also underscored with feature numbers, and then we can scale this out and do library dev. Like, yeah, sure, you can try that. I haven't tried it. On some architectural mathematical level, that's roughly what I'm saying with the other thing. This is just going to be more clunky, but whatever. Other ideas, like how do we do this? Let's think. And again, if you have thoughts or diving into KMP and trying to do this, please reach out. Here, Slack, whatever. Maybe not till tomorrow. You have the keynote and this talk. My brain is about to shut off. But if you want to talk today, I'll still talk. I don't know if I'm going to be very smart. Anyway, thanks. Don't do 2 talks at the conference, by the way. Here, all the content, just go here. You'll find it in a blog or whatever. Thank you for coming.